Ahoy there. We have the meta snapshot for patch 12.21. This is for the second week, so there are a lot of new developments. We have, I believe, 2 new compositions that we're adding, and we have an exclusive prediction of what the World Championship meta could look like. So definitely stay tuned for that if you're interested in competitive TFT, because this is probably the only site that has predictions from players who actually play the game. Because most of those like news sites for esports or whatever you want to call it, they're written by like communications majors, you know, no flame, but they don't actually play TFT that much. But this one, it actually is played by someone who competes in tournaments and someone who closely follows the scene in every single region. But we'll get into that later. So first things first, if you just want to play and figure out what the best comps are, we're of course going to go over all of that, as well as how to play every single one of these comps. So we'll just start off with the S tiers right now, S, A, B, and then go into how to play them. So in the S tier, we have Grave Seraphine. We have the Dragon comp, and then we have a new comp, Guardian Daeja, Olaf Reroll, Jade, Kaisa Reroll, Mirage Daeja, Karma Reroll, and Yone Reroll. You may have noticed already, why are there so many S tier compositions? Well, they all fill a very specific start that you can kind of ease into each and every one of these comps. So this whole set, set 7 and 7.5 have been defined by augments. And if you get the right augments for certain comps, you're going to be topping that lobby, but it's kind of hard to get those exact combinations. So that's why it really just depends on what you're hitting. And we'll go into every condition of each comp, like just a sneak peek. We have like a requirements section for every comp built out. So if you guys are wondering like when should I go for a certain comp, we list that all out. But into the A tier, we have Lagoon, Ezreal Reroll, Guild Zippy. Astral made a bump up to the A tier. It was B tier before. Xayah, Darkflight Rengar, Mage Nomsy, Whispers built different, and another new comp, Vertical Cannoneers. We'll explain what vertical is later. People throw around the words vertical and horizontal, and it essentially just means like going deep into a trait or going into a bunch of little traits. In the B tier, we have Dragonmancer Lee Sin, Graves Nilah, and Darkflight Cannoneer, and then that's going to wrap it up for this patch. So starting off in the S tier, and again, if you guys found the summary pretty valuable, go ahead and subscribe below. We're going to be coming out with a lot of Set 8 content. I have participated in the Set 8 preview, so I played a bunch of games there, and I have all the info on the new set coming out to you guys soon. So definitely subscribe below if you don't want to miss out on that as soon as it comes out. I can't tell you which day, but it's soon. But onto this comp, not much has changed here, so we'll kind of skip through this a little bit. A lot of people have heard the story about the Grave Seraphine comp already. You just want Zeke's Herald and Morellonomicon. We write that down here. So if you do like a belt start and you happen to get like a sword or something, or you get another belt, definitely try to consider going for the Grave Seraphine comp. It's still very, very strong. You could go for 3-star Seraphine, 2-star Seraphine. You really just need the Graves to really shape the comp out. Everything else just determines whether you're getting like a top 6, top 4, or top 2. We list out some augments you could try down here as well, but generally you want to roll at around level 7 for this comp, and that will pretty much round it out. But yeah, we also have like little snippets of notes on any update that has happened since the last meta snapshot came out. So those are always good to check out on my website, bunnymuffins.lol/meta. Now onto the Dragon comp. Again, last week we went over the new variant, which is the Aurelion Soul one, very popular in, I believe, Korea. And we also have the classic Aoshin comp. A lot of people wondered what the name of the Aoshin comp is, or what they call the Aoshin Dragon. If you know the answer, let me know down in the comments below. I can't really say it out loud on YouTube because they'll like censor the word or whatever. But some of my friends were wondering, like, because they were hearing about the name and they didn't believe it, so they asked me, and I was like, yeah, it's that. And they're like, oh, it's kind of funny. But the Aurelion Soul comp really took up a lot in popularity recently. The reason why is because you don't need like a Spear of Shojin, because no one really holds Spear of Shojin that well in the early game. So if you just build regular ability power items, Aurelion Soul is going to utilize those much better than the Aoshin. And a lot of people weren't going for Aurelion Soul in general, so it just became like a much more usable composition because it's easier to hit that dragon. Meanwhile, everyone else is chasing that Aoshin. We have some substitutions down here if you guys want to take a look at that, but the main thing required for playing the Dragon comp is just getting lucky. So I released a coaching video with the person who made this meta snapshot, Void Sins, and essentially it was a fast 9 game because we got a really good start. And a lot of people were commenting like, hey, how come you showed one of your games where you just like high rolled? And well, one, in a coaching video, you only get one shot at the video, right? Because you can only play one game. It just happened to be a high roll game. 2, it shows what type of conditions are necessary for a fast 9, because you can't fast 9 with just any start. You have to get a very specific start to allow you to do that, and that game was one of those games. So if you guys are curious on that, I'll leave a card up here for you guys to check that out. But it essentially gives you an example of what needs to happen for you to go for a fast 9. It's pretty rare. On to the next comp though, we have Guardian Daeja. This is a new one of the patch, so this is going to revolve around Daeja and Idis as being your two main people. You run 4 Mirage by adding in a Leona, she's also a Guardian, and then you add in Braum and Rakan. Those are just like 2 solid tank units, and you're just buying a lot of time in order to get your Daeja going. That's why we build Rageblade on her, that's why we build Archangels on her. I'm sure if I scroll down, we'll see like Ascension down in the Augment section. Yep, right here. And yeah, I didn't even edit that section, and I just know that it's there because it just makes sense because this is a stall comp essentially, right? But you throw your tank items onto Idis, stacking items onto Daeja, and that's really all there is to it. Idis is kind of underrated this set. He was very popular in set 7, then kind of fell off in popularity in 7.5, but he found its place finally towards the end of the set. But this could have been included under Mirage, but I felt this comp was distinctive enough to deserve its own spot. This comp emerged because international regions realized that the Guardian trait is probably the most reliable frontline in the game, and is perfect for stalling for a ramping Daeja. So if you're going for the regular Mirage comp and you hit an Idis 2, just pivot into this one. You don't have to like force this comp from the get-go. You could just play regular Mirage. But you know how sometimes in your random games you hit 4-cost units that don't belong in your composition, but you hit them anyways, and you're wondering like, hey, should I play around those, or do I just sell them and skip them? Well, in some cases you can play them, and this is definitely one of those prime examples. We go over like how to play it and what to do on each Mirage variant down here, but we'll get over that in the Mirage section as well, so I'll skip that for now. Next up, we have Olaf Scalescorn. So this one is just like the typical strong reroll comp right now. That's 3-cost reroll. Olaf being the primary carry. You definitely need these 2 items, Rapid Fire Cannon and Infinity Edge. The results without it are extraordinarily different. So you may notice on some TFT data sites, data is very misused in TFT. I'll probably come out with a video on this later, but you may see some builds where Olaf doesn't have RFC, and this is why data can be misleading sometimes, because Olaf without RFC is not that great. I'm not saying it's not playable, but it's much worse compared to having the RFC. And the only reason why some item combinations do really well without the RFC is because they have other ways to give Olaf range, such as scope weapons. So always keep that in mind whenever you're looking at data for TFT, because you really have to include all the little niche scenarios. So essentially, like, you may see a high win rate on non-RFC builds for Olaf, but it's like a bait because those builds have scope weapons a lot of times. But the good thing about this comp is that you have a lot of different carry options. You have Pantheon, Olaf, and Soy'Fen. They all love sword items. They all love Hand of Justice. They all love healing items, and like Titan's Resolve also works on all 3. So literally you could share all these items between who you 2-star first and kind of use them. You don't have to play reroll Olaf either. If you hit like a early Pantheon 2 and you still have Olaf 2, maybe you could transition into like a Whisper comp with like Soy'Fen Pantheon. Maybe you could go into like a Soy'Fen if you hit a early Soy'Fen 2. So there are a lot of different ways to pivot because they share the same items, but for this build specifically, you want to reroll at level 7 for Olaf 3-star, and the reason why is because that's just the level where you have the highest odds of hitting 3-cost units, so you want to just use that and take advantage of it to kind of get into that build. Keep in mind, this is a pretty flexible build, so you could go into a lot of different variations, which we go into in this section over here. But moving on, let's go to the Soy'Fen comp. This one, again, a lot of same units. They have Pantheon and Soy'Fen, as we talked about before, but the main carry is going to be Xiaoyu. This build's good because you could use all sorts of items. If you have tank items, you could put them on Pantheon or Jace. If you have ability power items, you could throw them on Jace, and then of course the attack damage items go on Xiaoyu, and if you get so many attack damage items, you could drop them on Soy'Fen as well. So this is another comp which makes really good use of like a lot of items. Pretty much everything is buildable, which is one of the advantages. But this is still like a very tried and true comp in this current patch. It's just pretty solid. You want to roll on level 8. So if you ever get into like a fast 8 pattern, this could be one of the comps you could go for because it revolves on a lot of 4-cost carries or tier 4 carries. The next build we have up is Kaisa Reroll. So Kaisa did get nerfed a little bit in the last patch, but she's still very playable. We'll have to see how often people are going to be playing this in the regional finals, or sorry, the world finals, because this comp and the Karma comp, They're both like the Dragonmancer rerolls, and they're a bit odd to play and a little different at higher levels. So I actually really like these reroll comps at lower levels because a lot of teams don't cap out into like the super high, super strong types of teams. And that's just because the players are simply worse. I mean, you can't compare a random TFT player to someone competing in the world championships. It's like comparing an Olympian to like a grade schooler, right? It's just not a fair comparison. So different strategies work at those different levels. And I think like Kaisa Reroll and Karma Reroll are really good in those points because when you play these comps at like higher levels, you have to pivot into something else like the Dragon build, which can be a little troublesome for some players. But moving on into the Mirage build, we have, of course, another Daeja carry. And Daeja right now, he's going to be paired up with the Nunu. And then there are two other builds you could go for. So you could do the Cavalier build that we see here, which is Rel, Sejuani, and Hecarim. Or you could go into the Guild Daeja build. This is achieved by dropping 2 of Yasuo, Nunu, and Yone, getting rid of the 2 Cavaliers and Rel and Hecarim, and adding in 4 to 6 guild units such as Twitch, Jace, Bard, etc. All those units are going to buff up your Daeja a bunch and just generally has good stat lines. We go into a bunch of the different Mirage variants down here, so take a look at that in your free time so you know how to adjust, but most of them play the same. The only different ones is, I believe, the Pirate one and the, what's it called, Electro Charge. That's the only two, or sorry, Electric Overload. Those are the only 2 Mirage variants that you kind of have to switch up your playstyle. Now onto Karma Reroll. We just talked about this, but you just reroll for Karma at level 5, and then you have her carry you through the whole mid game. And then if you're in lower levels, you can kind of just keep the Karma, but as you go higher and higher, you might want to pivot into something else in the super late game, unless you have like the perfect augments, because this comp does eventually fall off. I mean, it has to, right? Because it's a 1-cost carry versus like a 2-star Aoshin. It's just, if it was a fair comparison, the game would not be balanced. And they tried to balance the game at least. It's not going to be perfectly balanced. I see a lot of comments that are like, man, this game isn't balanced, or like this sucks, that sucks, that sucks. Like, I mean, after a certain point, like, yeah, like not everything is perfectly balanced, but it's kind of part of the game at this point. You know, you kind of have to recognize when something is OP, when something's not OP, and like when to go for it. Next build up we have is Yone Reroll. This is a very inconsistent comp because you need either Swiftshot emblem, either from augments or like building it, or scope weapons too. Because you just need extra range on your Yone and the extra attack speed, and if you just don't have that, the comp just isn't that worth going. So I really only recommend this if you start the game at 2-1 with one of these requirements, and maybe even having a couple of Yones early on, because if you don't get Yone 3-star, you're going to be struggling as well. So that's the tricky part of this comp, but you want to kind of stabilize at level 6 on stage 3-2, and then at level 6, just slow roll for your 3-star Yone from there. Onto the next tier, we have A tier. So A tiers are a little less consistent, still good, but just not as good as the S tier. We'll start off with Lagoon, Soam, and Nilah. So this is a classic AP carry comp. Soam is a 7-cost unit, but he's a tier 4, so you want to be rolling at level 8 for this. You could stabilize at level 7, so honestly, this comp is pretty flexible. You could kind of stabilize at level 7 or level 8. I prefer level 8 if I had to choose in a perfect world, but sometimes if you're low HP, you have to do it at level 7. But Soam is going to do a lot of the work, and then Nilah is going to finish everything off and kill steal everything. So it kind of has that dynamic going on, and then Silence is just the main tank for your mages. You could do regular tank items, or you could spam ZZ-Rot portals. Both methods work. I wouldn't mix the two though. So either go like full on, lots of ZZ-Rots, or just regular tanks items onto your Silas. Items for Nilah, Edge and Knight's the most important one. Items for Soam, Morello's the most important one, and then blue buff after that. Third items on both don't really matter that much, so don't stress too much about that. Lagoon tables available at your convenience, but going on into the next build, we have Zippy Carry. So Zippy is part of the Xayah builds. They're kind of like twin builds because they both run pretty much the same exact units. You just switch out Zippy for Shyvana, and then I believe it is Sejuani for Rakan. And that's pretty much the only changes you kind of do. The difference between the two is that Zippy spikes more so in the mid game, and then the full dedicated Xayah comp spikes more in the late game. So it depends what you need in that specific game and what you're hitting, because you can't just like choose when you're going to hit stuff, right? You can influence it by rolling, but you can't guarantee anything in this life or in TFT. So you have to use Zippy as like more of a tool to get you to other stages in the late game and then pivot out of it eventually. But overall, pretty solid comp. You roll and stabilize at 7, either at stage 3, 5, or 4-1. Next build up, we have Ezreal Reroll. So this comp is just like a classic low-cost reroll comp. Look at all the units. We don't see a single tier 4 or tier 5 unit in this picture. The most expensive one is just one guy at tier 3 in the Rakan, but you're just spamming a bunch of Guardians and then just having Ezreal carry. It's very similar to the Daeja build with the Guardians, but you're just using all the low cost units instead. So you're going to be re-rolling a lot at level 5. You could even do a hyper roll at level 4 at stage 3-1. So 2 different options you have there. But moving on into the next build, we have the Astral Mages. So this is another reroll comp. And we're putting this in A tier because it did get a little bit stronger. So if you get a lot of the early Astral units, you get pretty good orbs, and then you kind of just snowball the game into your power spikes. And Lux is pretty solid. I wouldn't say she's the best carry. I will note that she does have 2 different item builds. The one you see here is a Spear of Shojin plus ability power build, but there's also a blue buff plus Morello combo that's really good on Lux. So generally Spear of Shojin is better on Lux, but if you have the Morello, blue buff is better because you apply the Morello buff earlier on. There's not too much to say about this comp. You just kind of slow roll at level 6 for Lux, and that's pretty much it. We have like 3 hours of gameplay you can check out by clicking this button over here. It's on the website, bunnymuffins.lol, but it's also on my YouTube channel. On to the next build, we have the Xayah Ragewing or Guild Xayah, and this comp is essentially really good at punishing non-high roll comps. So if you just have like a regular game of TFT and you're like expecting the average amount of luck, this comp is pretty good for you because that's really all there is to it. Maybe you get a Xayah 2 at a reasonable time, and maybe you hit a Shyvana 1 but not a Shyvana 2. That's pretty much like the power cap of the comp. Like getting a Shyvana 2, while great, it isn't going to change your life like an Aoshin 2 will. So if you want to like settle on something, let's say you're like 28 or something like that, and maybe there's someone, you like them, but they're not like the perfect person, you could settle for them, and that'd be kind of like what the Xayah Ragewing is. It's not like that person's bad or anything. It's just they're a pretty good match, they're a very good match, they're just not like the one you know for sure. Like that's pretty much what the Xayah build is. It's like if you expect a regular outcome in a TFT game, that's going to be it. It's like you hit your 4-cost carry, you got decent items on them, and then you hit a 1-star legendary that power spikes your comp a little bit, but anything after that, it's not going to help you that much. If you want to like high roll, maybe you go for the Aoshin comp or Aurelion Soul comp. So the way to play this, you want to have item holders early game, such as Ezreal for your attack damage items. You could also use Nidalee, Senna, Varus, or Twitch. And then eventually you're playing the Swiftshots, you're swapping them in and out as you upgrade them. So you could go from like Ezreal to Varus, eventually into Xayah. And then you just play random tank units. Generally, it's going to be the guild units. So we have like Jace, Sejuani. Maybe you play other Cavaliers until you find everyone, and then slowly swap into the picture you have up here. Keep in mind, this is the level 9 board, so you can't hit this unless you do reach level 9. You could just drop Bard, Sejuani temporarily until you hit everyone, or if you're level 8 until you get to level 9. On to the next build, we have Darkflight Rengar. So this one is like another reroll comp. Really good with double trouble, and it really shines if you just boost it with an augment, but it's a little difficult to just request specific augments, obviously, so this comp's staying in the A tier mainly because of that reason. But the main goal of the comp is to just get an early Zeke's Herald and then just make everyone pay the Darkflight tax, because you kill a lot of people at around stage 3 when you maybe hit a Rengar 2-star with the Zeke's Herald that's spread amongst a bunch of Darkflight units, and then you kind of just do a lot of damage in the early to mid game. And then later on, you kind of plateau for a bit until you hit the Rengar 3-star. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, so you really have to play around that. Another thing that makes this comp really, really good is if you get a Force of Nature, because you just sacrifice the Force of Nature in the middle and you pretty much get an extra item for free, along with getting the Darkflight bonus for the items as well. But onto the next build, we have Zyra, Pantheon, and Whispers. This build, not that great, but still decent if you want to play a composition that's not that contested. So that's pretty much when you would go for this. If you hit like early Zyras and maybe get a couple of Whispers early on as well, maybe you get a 1-star Soy'Fen, you could consider going for this. It's not really like that great though. I feel like there are better comps to go if you get a lot of bows, but it's definitely something to consider. Built different, we're going to skip this comp for now. You pretty much just go for Graves carry and then run the units you see here, and just play multiple copies of different champions and just pretty much just play build different how you would normally play build different. There's a gameplay video over here for you guys to check out there. But onto the new composition, we have Vertical Cannoneers. So this is a pretty sleeper comp, right? So Vertical Cannoneers is a pretty sleeper comp right now. What vertical means is you go deep into a trait. For example, in this one, we go for 4 Cannoneers. Horizontal is going for like the 2 synergies or maybe like the 1 or 3 synergies, such as like Guardian, Guild, Mystic, Ragewing, Shimmer Scale, as you see here. But going for a vertical, such as like 4 or 6 Cannoneer, it's like going really deep into the comp, right? If I went like 6 Guardian, I'd call that like a vertical Guardian comp. So that's where the name comes from. Horizontal is more like widespread. So if you have like Stand United, horizontal is generally better. But that's just where the naming convention comes from. It's not important. It's just if you hear those terms, that's what they mean. But again, this comp is kind of sleeper because not many people play this. And if Nomsy is a Cannoneer, it becomes even better, especially if you have the right augments. So the requirements here is at least 4 Cannoneers, and then any item holder will do in the early game: Senna, Ezreal, Wukong, or Sett. These are generally good holders for attack damage items. And here's how to play it. So I'm going to read the whole thing since this is a new comp. But the playstyle is simple, but there are a bunch of paths you can take to get to the end game board. You can play an early game, such as 2 Cannoneer, 2 Ragewing, 2 Guardian, and a carry like Senna early on. And then later, find a replacement for her because you still need Senna as a Cannoneer trait bot while you look for Graves and Nomsy. If you can't play Cannoneers early, you could do Ezreal Swiftshots and then switch into it, or play like weird stuff like Jade, even like Astral for Econ, and then pivot back into this. Obviously, it's easier to get into this version by doing the Senna build, but sometimes you don't get to choose what you get in the early game. Other ways to get here is by playing the Darkflight Cannoneer comp and then transitioning into it after you sell the Rel plus Cannoneers. So if you get the +1 Cannoneer augment, definitely go for 6 Cannoneer, and then if you do have that, just like lose the Bard at level 8, add in like the Zeri for 6 Cannoneer. And then for augments, we have Cannoneer Crown, Cannoneer Crush obviously, and the Heart. Hotshot's really good, Stand United, Cybernetic Implants, Cybernetic Uplink, because you're going to be holding a lot of items on a lot of different people. Better Together is really good in any Zeke's comps. Knife's Edge, you just move everyone up to the second row. Celestial Blessing and Thrill the Hunt are decent for healing. So again, not too many people are playing this comp, so if you haven't tried it yet, definitely try it now, especially right after you see this video, because maybe after everyone else sees it, they'll they'll be playing it as well. It's an unfortunate part of TFT, right? But onto the B tier, we have Mage Nomsy. It's playable. It's not that great, but it's playable. But she just doesn't kill everything. So Nomsy is kind of one of those characters that either one-taps everything in her first cast, or she needs to take 2 casts to kill people. So when she kills everyone in 1 shot, that's obviously really good. But right now she's taking 2 shots to kill everyone because everyone's playing Mystics. So not as strong anymore. So she's not really a victim of being bad. She's more of a victim of the system, right? Everyone's playing Mystic because of all the AO Shins going around, and it's just an unfortunate side effect of that meta change, right? You know, sometimes in life, you feel like you're doing everything the same as before, nothing's changed, but then all of a sudden you're like doing worse for some reason. And that's kind of what happened to Nomsy. I'm not saying everything is the system's fault. Nomsy could be better herself, but yeah, that's essentially like the parallel I can draw there. Darkflight Cannoneer, this one, it's still a decent comp. Again, you could use this to pivot into the regular vertical Cannoneer comp, or you could use this to pivot into Aphelios. So, sorry, not Aphelios, into Darkflight Rengar. So there are a bunch of different options with this composition. You just have to figure out if it's actually viable to go for like the Graves carry with the Aphelios complementing it, or if the other ones are better. Because the other comps, the other 2 comps I mentioned, they are better than this. So only go for the Aphelios version if you're like actually either getting a lot of Aphelioses, getting a lot of Zekes, or really hitting a lot of Graves early on. Next build up we have is Lee Sin Dragonmancer. They're just better Dragonmancer builds, so they're kind of griefing the units for this build. Again, I guess Lee Sin's another Nomsy, right? It's kind of like the victim of the system because everyone's going for Dragonmancer comps in Kaisa and Karma, that it just leaves this guy out in the dust a little bit. So, yeah. I just laugh whenever I think of these because it's just funny to think about, right? Graves Nilah, also in the B tier. This is what an example of a horizontal comp would look like. I hear, the rumor is, next set, okay, never mind, I can't say it, but subscribe so you guys can listen about the Set 8 stuff because I can't spoil it. I'm like, I signed a contract and it won't let me spoil it, but I didn't even do this on purpose. I just really wanted to talk about something, but I just can't. But this comp reminds me of something that may be or may not be viable in Set 8. C tiers, ignore the C tiers, and then now for the tourney meta for the World Championships. So let's make some guesses, right? Like, I guess a fun exercise to do is before you guys read this, maybe write down, it doesn't have to be in the comments, it could be on like pen and paper as well, right? It's a fun exercise to do. Write down what comps you think the top players will be playing at the World Championships, because the meta, while it is kind of the same, it is slightly different, and there are some like regional flavors that are going to be incorporated as well. But right now, like, we think Graves, Seraphine, Soy'Fen, and Daeja are going to be probably like the bread and butters for people. But again, in Korea, we saw the surprise comp of the Aurelion Sol Dragon Carry instead of Aoshin. And there are also a lot of things that are not talked about that much. Perhaps something like Mage Astrals, Kaisa, Karma, Ezreal, Lilia, Yone, Olaf, and even a Phelios reroll can be viable. Of course, if you get like really crazy augments for one of these, it could lead into some brand new comps. And of course, like Worlds players, they're not going to be playing just to play. They're not on autopilot. They're in each game, they're going to be trying to maximize their chance to win that specific game. And they're going to do everything in their power that allows them to achieve that. So whenever the World Championships happen, we always see some random crazy comp win. It's like some 3-star of some random champion that we never use as a carry. That happens all the time. So we really have to look out for this. But again, Voidson thinks that a lot of reroll is going to be kind of surprising because, again, you get some weird stuff that happens in TFT because they really did make a lot of games different from all the other ones just because of augments and whether people are contesting certain units or not. As for non-reroll comps, maybe Xayah is like the top underrated comp right now, but maybe they use Xayah to pivot into something else. So maybe they play something early on, switch into Xayah, and then switch into something else, or maybe they're going to go for Xayah 3. I'm going to go on record here and say I think Xayah 3 is complete garbage, but because I see Xayah 3 lose to regular dragon boards all the time, but maybe they have a way to kind of beat those dragon boards with the Xayah 3 that I don't really know about. But we'll just have to see. I believe the World Championships are going on, I think it's next week, but we do have the last chance qualifiers for both the East and West going on this weekend. So we'll really have to wait and see what happens. And even though the World Championship is next week, they're going to be playing on this patch because on the next patch, they're going to be doing a for fun patch because it's the last patch of the set. So they're going to be adding stuff like 2 treasure dragons instead of just 1. So it's like double the fun, double the action, whatever you want to call it. But here are the item starts that we recommend right now. So sword, always going to be the best because all the top comps need a sword, multiple of them. So you just go for that. I personally like belt a lot because I like the defensive items. I also like flexing into like a Zeke's Herald, Morellonomicon type of builds. But it's really up to personal preference. The only ones I don't recommend is Chain, Glove, and Negatron. I feel like those are a step down between everything else that we see here. But moving on all the way to the top, like lots of different options for you guys to try for this week. Let me know which ones are your favorite down below. If you're trying to do like a last minute climb, maybe you guys can do some coaching as well. It's on my website, info's there. I have a bunch of different coaches at different price points that you guys can reach out to and kind of just like feed some of the other people in the TFT community, you know, give them a bone here and there because it's just a nice thing to do, keeps everyone more active, and they are actually really good coaches. I've used all of them. They just prepare me for different things, and yeah, it's overall pretty helpful. And like these guys spend like hours and hours into like learning TFT. So like getting like 1 session for like $15 or like 2 sessions for 40 because this guy does 2 games of analysis. I think this guy does 1. It's like really time saving if you want to like just learn really, really quickly or get better really, really fast. So just check that out, especially if you're making those like last minute type of climbs. But that's going to be it for me today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you guys for set 8 and beyond. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to share and subscribe, and of course smash that like button. Each like is an LP I gain before the next video.